afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here. Special thanks to the team from Search Inc. They're a wonderful group, so just glad to be here and be able to support them. As she mentioned just a bit ago, so I lead all our startup and investor engagement for all of Google Cloud across all of Europe, which effectively means I spend my days working and talking with both startups and investors. And as you do, most of my time these days is spent within the AI space and just evaluating it and then working with our own internal investing arms, whether that's capital G, GV, or even corp dev. But then a large part is where I derive a lot of my own satisfaction is just working with amazing people building beautiful things. So when I spoke with Sophie earlier about ultimately what is it to talk about, thought process was, well, you're talking to hundreds of startups every day that are within this space. So maybe share some insight on trends or just things that you see across the board. So for me, I thought this was a very natural place to start because many entrepreneurs and hell, even investors, they feel this, right? This phenomenon of AI, it isn't anything new. I mean, let's be honest, it's been a conversation talked about since the 50s. The only difference in why it's likely here to stay this time is because computing power has actually caught up. The different advances from Deep Blue with Gary Kasparov in 1997 to Lee Sedol and DeepMind over the last year or two. So, I think overall, the most important thing kind of going forward will be then all these inputs that people have, it can also be synonymous with noise, and how are people using that to actually distill down what they're going to build into their product. Because the reality is, AI, ML, whatever you want to call it, it's still about data, right? And it's going to be about people just using and injecting AI ultimately in how they derive greater insights into their products and what their customers are saying, and how are they going to create a memorable experience. Now, from a trends perspective, I mean, there's always the general AI approach, which you have a lot of the big players, your Googles and Facebooks, that are deeply entrenched within that. I wouldn't say it's impossible for startups to enter into that market, because you do have some, but it's a whole hell of a lot harder. So that's where you start seeing this great shift in AI being much more niche and kind of industry specific. So if you think of kind of industries that are traditionally rich in data, so you think of like fintech, you think of health tech, probably a lot of health tech, like say the genomics space. Obviously, it's rich in data, and at the end of the day, that's what's going to power everything. But it also gives the startups an opportunity to have a leg up on the competition because they do have that deep domain expertise. But then kind of beyond that, there's also that, the more proprietary your data is, the more unique it is, then if your IP is firmly wrapped around that, it makes your IP much more defensible, which investors will always be kind of sniffing around for. But then it just kind of puts you much more in the driver's seat, kind of in how you're building your product. And some people might even say that kind of models and tool sets matter much less, and it's just much more about that uniqueness of the data. I'd also add to that, I didn't put it on there, but making sure that people are injecting enough randomness, just because I feel quite often a lot of startups will be maybe doing reinforcement learning, but they don't throw enough randomness into the equation, which then I think you can debate, ultimately what type of response are you trying to achieve and what are you getting back. There's also kind of this shift in movement of people becoming a lot more platform agnostic for good reason. So open source is definitely winning out for tools. And that's not just kind of tool sets, but I think even from a data perspective. So I think of like cool organizations like the Open Data Institute, ODI, Tim Berners-Lee's group in London. They're doing some wonderful things. And then you have people that are crowdsourcing data like Mapillary, who's a super cool startup as well. So there's a lot of ways that people are acquiring data and then leveraging open source tools. And then it sounds very simplistic, but I see a lot of startups that they'll say, all right, we're going to do machine learning, and we need to buy GPUs. We're going to go buy cards. And without any kind of thought or reservation around what are the implications from a cost perspective, and what are you actually trying to train? We actually find that in many cases, people can train models using regular CPUs, and it can get the job done in a cost-efficient manner. Of course, I do understand, in a lot of cases, GPUs will help speed up that time. But I think it's also important to remember that GPUs weren't built specifically for like neural networks and deep learning. They were built for gaming initially. So that led us down the path of building our own custom ASICs, tensor processing units, TPUs. So we announced, I guess maybe it was maybe 2 months ago at I/O that we're releasing the TPUs. So these are what I like to call the unsung hero in the kind of AlphaGo games, because that's ultimately what powered it. The TPUs, for us, it was a bit of a strategic and financial decision in the sense that we saw that, well, at the rate that we're growing, and how do you continue delivering this thing called search and YouTube at planet scale, it's really expensive. How many more data centers do we need to buy? So we thought there must be another way. So for us, it was building our own, as you do. Yeah, you'll have, and we're not the only ones going down this path. NVIDIA as well, and many others. So it'll certainly be something to continue to watch. By now I've used the word AI and ML quite a bit, but the reality is that it's still about data. Data's the new king, and again, it's going to be what ultimately powers the products that many of you are building today. If we were to, say, take a trip down memory lane for us, if you think about our core business and some of the things we learned along the way, our first kind of foray into kind of AI and ML was about that core business. First you had web search, which really was a clever hack, and it was actually information retrieval. We just did a really good job at tricking everyone into thinking that it was AI. But it wasn't. But then, of course, we learned, and we acquired more data, and then all of a sudden you go down this path of web answers. So that's where then all of a sudden you have, hey, we can identify things down to a sentence and to a page. And then you have the next iteration, which is knowledge graph. So this is where now we can understand block of text and understand the world around us. You can query it and through natural language. And that's where things start to get much more interesting. Now, at the end of the day, what are we trying to solve for? And what is anyone trying to solve for? It's still about just trying to figure out common sense. I wish I could tell you something that was sexier, but it's the truth. It's still what we're trying to figure out. I mean, all of us, I don't have to tell you about, what does this sign mean, right? You guys know it. But when you think about computers, they still don't have a clue, right? So there's still a lot of work to do and a lot within that space that we're trying to figure out. But I think we're trying to get those simulators that we have in our brains, and we're still trying to work it through into computers. Now, I thought this was a good segue just to kind of talk about, well, if AI and machine learning is kind of where the world is going to, then what are the challenges that people have? Certainly startups that I come across. And a large part of that is absolutely of, hey, getting data sets and acquiring talent. So I think a lot of kind of guidance and advice I would kind of have for people is, well, if you don't have to build a model, don't do it. You figure if there's, 21 million professional coders in the world, and of that, there's a small subset that are actually deep learning engineers. So that means that it's hard to find these people, really hard. It's hard for us to find them. So if you don't have to, and you can use like a prepackaged API, do it. And you see a lot of people that ultimately they start going down this fork in the road, where do we use a prepackaged, pre-trained model, or do we go and build it ourselves? And for those of you that are building yourselves, then the next thing you have is, okay, how do we find these people? or how do we get data sets? So again, you have people that are doing crowdsourcing, striking partnerships with different organizations, government as well. But then also, I would kind of say, use resources that exist today, like Kaggle. So, full disclosure, I was a fan of Kaggle before Google acquired them in March. But yeah, they're really cool just because it's a collection of data scientists from around the world, and people just post competitions there. So I always tell people that are looking to hire, create a competition, post it there, and the people that are helping you to solve it, go find them and hire them. And that's a good way to kind of try and find some talent. And then the people are readily also sharing data sets as well. So it's a cool thing. I think this picture for me always a bit of symbolism, and it can mean so many things. By now, investors are either they've drank the Kool-Aid and they said, yep, I'm all in on AI, or they're like very skeptical and saying, I think this is a quick way to piss my money away and it'll just go, because it doesn't, especially for pure AI companies, this isn't a defined business model. How do we work with this? And then, of course, it goes on the other side. Like, startups feel that pressure, right? Because they know they generally have limited resources, time, money, and that making the right hires is tremendously tough. So I guess what I'm saying is, investors know that they're trying and working their ass off trying to find the right people that are going to fundamentally help them go one step beyond, that'll make a difference. And in the end, if there's anything I could kind of impart from a wisdom perspective, I guess, is just making sure that you're doing it for the right reasons. Don't do it for an acqui-hire. Don't do it because you want to raise some crazy, stupid valuation, because really those are just false promises, right? Stay true to yourself. Do it because fundamentally you want to create a new category, because you want to maybe be a category leader in something that exists today, or really that you want to create and change behaviors in society for the better. This is ultimately should be part of your core ethos of how you're thinking about AI. And definitely don't get caught up in buzzword bingo bullshit. I joke around, but I feel like every pitch deck that I see, these days, people went from 3 years ago, everything said big data. They did like a control find and changed it to AI and ML. It's funny to joke around about, it's true. I get it. Again, I know why people are doing it. Because, even though very few people are actually doing AI, the reality is everyone knows that this isn't just a phenomenon. This is a thing, and it's happening. And those that kind of get in now are the ones that will certainly benefit in how they build wonderfully beautiful products to try and impact people's lives and enrich lives. So, many of you have probably been told at some point that you're probably crazy and nuts, and the reality is you're doing something special. There's a lot of people that don't necessarily have the guts to do what you do. So I applaud you, and continue to go and change the world. And hopefully AI is a part of how you're doing that. So thanks for your time today, and yeah, be around.